From the Norse line, Harald silently prayed to his god, and he looked across the meadow at the approaching native army. He'd not seen an army of warriors this large since his childhood. They massed together into one ferocious beast, determined to drive the Norse from this land. This battle would determine the future of the Norse in Vinland. Harald had kept his conversion to Christianity a secret. Vikings and seafaring Norse in general refused to convert, and Harald had felt that if he revealed his allegiance to this new god, Thorfinn would not have hired him for this journey. He wanted to share in the wealth so that he could build his church. He wriggled his toes in his boot, felt his crucifix there where he kept it concealed. His thoughts turned to the day of his baptism. It had taken place in Lemingen. The priest and the rest of the clergy headed the procession with Harald's father and mother in front of him, and his wife and 2 daughters behind him. The priest led the long line into the gentle surf at the river's mouth, and stopped in knee-deep water. The clergy's robes floated with the ocean current. The priest instructed Harald to kneel before him. Beside him, a clergyman opened a prayer book with slow and deliberate movements, and handed it to the priest, who read a short passage in an unknown language that Harald didn't understand, even when he could hear the voice above the wind and the surf. Then the priest handed his staff and book to his attendants, laid his hands on the crown of Harald's head, and pushed him underneath the water. The priest continued his chant, the sound of the words resonating hollowly through the water and sinking into Harald as smoke permeates a room. Harald was quickly running out of air. His focus moved from words that he neither heard nor understood to watching air bubbles escaping his mouth. Was that a fish? He tried to take his attention off the lack of air in his lungs, for fear that he'd lose all control and leap out of the water, requiring that the whole thing be performed again from the very beginning. He watched the reeds swaying in unison with the motion of the surf, dropped his eyes to the riverbed shimmering in the afternoon sun. Instinctively his throat tightened as his brain told him that he needed to breathe. He felt that he'd suffocate in seconds. Then the hand that held his head beneath the water grabbed a hank of his hair and pulled him to the surface. He choked out air in salt water. But as quickly as it was pulled to the surface, his head was quickly pushed beneath the water again. Before his head again submerged, he glimpsed a lone hooded figure in gray robes walking down the pebbled beach. The image haunted Harald. In that single glance, he'd seen the figure stopping, saw wisps of hair as gray as the man's cloak flowing from the blowing wind, saw a craggy hand lift to wipe a tear from a lined cheek. The shifting of those around him drew Harald back to the present. The scrawling army spread across the entire width of the peninsula, from one body of water to the other. Hundreds of human heartbeats pumped lifeblood through their veins, energizing their muscles, pumping adrenaline through their bodies. He looked right, then left. If faith had a human form, the 65 Norse men and women with him were it. The natives overwhelmingly outnumbered them. Unlike the Norse, though, fighting was not their way of life. Even Harald could tell they had no concept of strategy. This fight, like every other event in their lives, was a communal effort. The chiefs of the 3 tribes stood tall and proud to the right of their army, their ornate headdresses fluttering in the breeze, their ceremonial spears at their sides, witnesses to the bravery of their warriors. Harald's arms quivered, but he wasn't scared or cold. He didn't know why it trembled. He quickly realized that it was his kin next to him, shaking with fear. He cringed as he heard his fellows drumming their swords against their wooden shields. Within their war cries he heard a hint of fear that would within the last moments before the attack change to ferocity, and then quickly to barbarism. He felt almost claustrophobic, with his kinsmen huddled together around him. He smelled their sweat and the strong stench of their breath. But once they engaged the enemy, Harald knew that they would spread out, swinging swords and axes at native chests and heads in wild abandon, not caring where the blade fell as long as it made contact. He couldn't resolve his Christian beliefs with the killing he was about to commit. Did they deserve to die for protecting their homeland? Because they were not Christian, did that make them any less entitled to life? Shouldn't he, as a protector of the faith, devote himself to preserving life no matter what the circumstance? Harald knew what was right and what was wrong. It was specific and clear in the Bible that he should not kill another person. Why was he about to commit this atrocity? He couldn't answer that in the context of his new belief. This was always as it had been with his people. The horror of the Norse invasions from his youth flooded his memory. The field of natives disappeared and he found himself back on the shores of the North Atlantic. Harald's father had believed that for him to be one of the greatest warrior leaders of his generation, he needed to be on the battlefield at an early age. He would have been thrown into the fight as soon as he could wield a sword, but his mother protested, and so Harald's father had relented. Even for a boy of 16, the harsh reality of the Norse campaigns was too much for him to bear. Harald, along with 100 other warriors, had landed on the shores of Brittany 15 years ago. Their chieftain wore his winged helmet, a symbol of the authority from the Vanir that he was chosen to lead the army of Norse. Harald still remembered how its shiny silver gleamed against the dreariness of the heavily overcast afternoon sky. If their leader's life were threatened in any way, and his personal bodyguards were overtaken, his warriors would have to respond immediately to save his life. If he should be killed on the battlefield, it would affect the course of the battle. At that time in his life, one battle seemed to merge into the next. Harald suffered severe memory loss that seemed to get worse and worse as the months of horrific victories escalated into years of never-ending slaughter. The fighting didn't seem to have a beginning or an end. The battle was constant from the dawn, when he hoped to see a day of peace, to the tragic night, when, weary from battle, he returned to their battle camp. Two Dogr turned into one Viknatal, then into one Mandudar. It was a continual prison of swinging hammers and axes, shattering human bones, their razor-sharp splinters stabbing outward through the skin. The sound of tearing flesh and the crack of splitting human skulls filled his ear and his mind. Human organs catapulted in all directions, rivers of blood covered the ground. His attack was unfocused and all too automatic. The chieftain once criticized, there was no thought behind each strike of the sword. Red became Harald's most hated color. The smell and look of cooking meat was sometimes too much to take. If the meat had any trace of red pigment in it, the suppressed trauma of those fighting years would resurface and he'd flash back to his many battles. In some cases, his unconscious mind created battles based on whatever was happening in his life at that time, or any difficulty he was experiencing. And in some extreme cases, he either became violently ill or unknowingly struck out at people. Harald, although brought up to fear very little, feared much, which was his reason to seek the sanctuary of the church. This was not so much running to something as running away from his father and a warrior life that he neither asked for nor wanted. Even on the voyage here, the salt air penetrating his nostrils made him nauseous, resurrected the smell of rotting fish, and a beach stained with the blood of his kin conjured images of seagulls swarming for food, landing and pecking at the mangled bodies floating on bloody water. Bloody water. Oceans of bloody water. It stained the rocks and his boots. With the surf jumping from the ocean behind him, like flames from a hearth, Harald looked toward a screaming figure and saw the winged helmet of his chieftain. An arrow stuck out of his right side. A second arrow pierced the chieftain's armpit. His battle axe, raised above his head, seemed to freeze for a brief second. Then in slow motion the axe fell with a whoosh. In a second of reality, Harald saw that he'd hacked through the body of a young male native. He didn't have enough time to see the face before the body dropped face down in front of him. His sword was out, swinging at an attacking foe. His opponent's weapon was too big for the man's size, causing him to strike ineffectively. One of Harald's blows struck its target more out of luck than skill. He hacked with his sword again, slicing his falling target across the chest, leaving a trail of splitting skin behind the tip of the blade as the man fell. Another attacker struck Harald's shield. Harald thrust his blade out under his shield and struck the attacker's side. He was about to strike the fatal blow when he glanced past the man, saw that the Skrælings chiefs, along with their bodyguards, had moved back to a safe distance where they could observe the battle in relative safety, and he realized that the oceans didn't exist. The sounds of the surf didn't exist. He was not on the shore of Brittany. He was on Vinland, and the two opposing masses had converged. A native boy lay on the ground next to the first youth he had felled, his bloody hands covering the wound that Harald had inflicted seconds earlier. The hurt in his face reminded Harald of his children after falling while climbing a tree or fighting with a sibling. This was a boy sent out to fight before he could fully understand what he was fighting for, and now he never would. Harald emotionally withdrew from the fighting, blocked the array of screams and shouts that rose in diseased harmony, and buried his humanity somewhere beneath the bloody surf. Another Brit attacked, holding his sword as one would a spear and thrusting it at him. The native didn't make it beyond the tip of Harald's sword. He squinted at the sun's reflection, glinting hot and bright off of his blade. He thought he saw Odin's handmaidens, the Valkyrie, flying over the battlefield, searching for those to be taken to Valhalla. He'd never seen a Valkyrie, but the flying beings had white bellies and black backs with orange beaks and webbed feet. They looked more bird than human. There was an aura around them that couldn't be explained. One seemed to hover overhead and looked into Harald's eyes as if looking into his soul, judging its worthiness to leave this existence and to forever live in Valhalla. Harald felt the warm sensation of a spear piercing his chest. It was a strange sort of warmth, moving from the wound to his arms. Then he felt nothing. And as quickly as his mind moved from battle to battle, he understood what had happened to him. He understood the reasons his father treated him the way he had, and why he felt the way he did. He knew the intricate workings of his mind. In fact, he could now manifest whatever he wanted. He was no longer the victim, but rather the creator of his future. He looked up and understood that these birds were not Valkyries. "Harald, I am here," a voice whispered in his ear. "I know. You've always been here. Why couldn't I hear you before?" "Because of all those other voices in your head." "I don't understand." "I know, but you will. Do you see that female coming toward you?" "Yes, I do." "She will bring you to me. Just allow her to touch you." "I will." "Will it hurt?" "It will be different, but it will not hurt." "I feel lighter." "That is good. You are now ready to begin your journey to me." "What is your name?" "Is it God?" "No, my name is Odin." "Oh, I thought because I was baptized." "We all inhabit the same realm of the human consciousness. Does it bother you that I am not the God you expected?" "It might have bothered me before, but it doesn't bother me now." "Good, because such things are part of human matters." "Odin, will my friends be well?" "You already know the answer." "Yes, you're right. I do.